Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Zeise's Right show by Post-Gazette sports columnist Paul Zeise. Paul, we're going to be talking today about Steelers' best and worst case scenarios. What can you dream for? What should you dread? Getting into some of that, maybe talking a little bit of Cam Heyward, and maybe talking a little bit about week one here against the Falcons. Paul and I will make our picks for what we think the Steelers are going to do this season as well. Plenty to talk about with Penn State, West Virginia, Pitt beating Kent State, and what it means for the weeks ahead. And then we're going to wrap up with some Pirates talk. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing well, Adam. I cannot complain. That's, it's finally football. This is the last show we've got to talk about all kinds of theoretical things and lists and all the other stuff, because next week we'll be able to start talking about football games.
Yes, and we get to talk about some football games that already happened in the college ranks. So excited to get into all that. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor, Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. All right, Paul, let's get into this best and worst case stuff. And let's create some parameters for the conversation first. We are going to assume that they have average injury luck, right? You know, maybe a couple of key guys get hurt over the course of the season, but nothing dramatically crazy, because obviously the worst case scenario is all of the best players getting hurt and them being dreadful. So we're going to operate in the likely realm there, and we're going to base this mostly on production, the roster. What are the best case scenarios for the roster as constructed? What are the worst case? So I guess let's start there, Paul. What do you see as this team's absolute ceiling in terms of what they are constructed to do?
Well, I mean, their best case, obviously, is that what you're asking me? What do I think is their best case?
Yes.
Scenario is Russell Wilson is good. And whatever learning curve there is with the offensive line, it's short. And either Van Jefferson or Pat Freiermuth or, name one of these other guys, one of those guys develops into a legitimate second receiving option. I mean, I think if all of those things happen and the Steelers find a little consistency, I could see them winning 11 games, probably 11-6, I think, and maybe even 11-6 is enough to win the division. So I would say that's probably, the best case, maybe 12-5, although I think their schedule is really difficult. And I think that maybe even if Russell Wilson is good, I don't know how good that would actually be or what it would actually look like. It's one of those things I have to see. So I think 11-5, if things go really well for them and those things happen, I still think there's going to be a learning curve with the offensive line that probably is going to cost them one game. So I'll say 11-6. I mean, I could see them doing that, and if they win in the division and maybe even getting a home playoff game, and then it comes down to a matchup. If they get a team like the Dolphins, I think they win. They're finally win that playoff game. I don't know if they're good enough to win the AFC, even if things go right for them. But I do think that if a lot of these things happen and go in a good way, I do think that they could become a team that maybe even wins the division and wins a playoff game. So I'll say if all of those things happen for them, and notice I haven't said anything on defense. I expect the defense to be good. So it's a matter of, is this going to be like last year's team where the defense has to carry the load all the time?
Yeah, I mean, that's how much better is the offense going to be. And that's why I tend to be a little more bullish on what the upside is if they can reach it. I'm not going to say that I'm super confident that they're going to reach it this year. But I think if everything does work out, I could say I think 12-13 is where I'd set the ceiling for them in terms of wins. And if you're scoring, if you can bump the scoring average by 5, 6, 7 points, I think it's going to make a huge difference with how this defense performs. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the best case scenario, they dominate the first half of the schedule. They dominate the division to some extent because those were teams they were able to beat last season, including the Ravens twice. Say you go 4-2, 5-1, in those games, and then by the time you get to those Eagles, Chiefs at the end of the year, maybe you already have 10-11 in the bank, and you're knocking on the door of beating these other potential Super Bowl contenders. So I'm going to set that as what I see as the upper limit. I'm not picking them to do that. For the record, I'm picking them to go. I'm picking them to finish with 10 wins again. But if things work out, I see enough pieces in place to be a team that challenges for a pretty high seed in the AFC. But let's go on the other side, Paul, before I have some other interesting questions for you about the season. What do you think the worst case scenario is? Could you see this team as constructed, barring, assuming they just don't get a ton of injuries, still maybe bottoming out at 7-8 wins if the quarterback situation is not materially different from last season? Maybe you're a little more professional in the form of Russell Wilson, but his regression undoes, some of that, kind of the way we saw with Ben Roethlisberger in those later years, and considering the difficulty of the schedule.
I really think that honestly 8 wins is probably the floor for this team. I just think their defense is too good. And, their defense is good, and the way they want to play offense, they're not going to take a lot of chances. They're going to, and so they're not going to do a lot of things to put the ball in harm's way and give other teams short fields and all the other things that, lead you to getting beat. I think it's very hard to play with the attitude that every drive that ends in a kick is a good one. But I do think that philosophy can win you X amount of games if you play smart. That's why I laugh when these teams have 3 wins or 4 wins. I think if you just play smart and you play reasonably good on defense, you're going to win 5, 6, 7 games. And so I think the Steelers defense is going to keep them afloat no matter what happens on offense. Because, one thing Russell Wilson doesn't turn the ball over. I just think that it's going to be a really interesting way for, just sort of way to watch this team grow on offense. But again, it all comes down for me. The offensive line has to, it has to evolve, has to get better. They have to figure out who's playing what position. That's, and so, I'll give you a great example. You look at what's, I think I broke this down in a story yesterday for the Post-Gazette. Look at what they're running out there for the offensive line this first week on the road. Your left tackle is a guy they've been trying to replace ever since the first day he got started. He got his first start a few years ago. They've been trying to replace him because he's just sort of mediocre. Your left guard is a 7th round pick in his second year. He played a total of 2 snaps on offense last year. Your center is a rookie making his first start. Your right guard is a solid veteran. He's made 32 out of 34 starts. I think he's a solid guy, a solid player. Obviously, James Daniels. I think he's obviously the one thing you kind of know what you're going to get. And then on your right side, you've got a right tackle who, he's looked bad this offseason, in this preseason. He's looked bad. Let's face it. So, I don't know. I think that's going to be the determination of where this thing goes.
I am, I think, again, a little slightly more bullish. I think I'd set the floor at 9 wins, because to believe that they're going to win 7 or 8, you have to look at this team and say, is this the worst Steelers team of the last handful of years, when they've somehow managed to get to either a 500 record when there was still a 16-game schedule, or 9 wins under the 17-game schedule? And I can't look at this team and say that this is the worst Steelers team of recent vintage, basically since 2018 when Antonio Brown left. So I think they should win at least 9 games with Russell Wilson at quarterback. His professionalism, his experience should get them there. I think for me, it's such a narrow band of outcomes, just because I think they're not going to be bad, but I think there's such a big distance between like 10 wins and 12, 13. Marginal wins you talk about more in baseball, but those marginal wins are hard to get. So I'm going to set my band between 9 and 13 wins for this team. But I'm picking 10. So I think I'm a little limited on their ability to be a really good team, but I think that they can be a solid team. So that's where I'm going to set that. Paul, I want to ask you about these position groups that we've talked so much about. We're at the end of the road here. We've talked about them for how many months without a whole lot of evidence of where things are going. But I had cornerbacks, quarterbacks, offensive line, and wide receiver written down as kind of the 4 big question marks for this team here at the beginning of September. Which one are you most confident will work out all right, and which one are you least confident will work out? And just kind of go down 1 through 4 with those.
All right, if I had to rank them 1 through 4 in terms of most confident to least confident, I would say cornerbacks, because I think Joey Porter's good, and I think Dante Jackson's going to be fine. Obviously, nickelback is a question, but I feel like they're going to be okay at cornerback. Joey Porter, I think, is his second year. He's going to be very good. Dante Jackson, I think, is good enough. I would say I think third, I'm going to have to go with receivers just because they have George Pickens. So you at least know you've got one. You know, I have no idea what you're going to get out of all those other guys. Nothing, none. Van Jefferson, I had a caller on my radio show this week who called and screamed at me because he said that I have no idea how good Van Jefferson really is and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, yeah, well, it's funny. This is year 6 for him. Nobody else that's watched him for the last 5 years knows how good he is either, apparently. But they do have George Pickens, who I expect to take another step and be a really good player for them. And this is his 3rd year, right? So, now he's going into his 3rd year. I think he should really come into his own. The offensive line, to me, again, with Ciamalo hurt. And then you're going to tell me that in a couple of weeks, we're going to move Broderick Jones to the left and bring in this Troy Fautanu to the right. So you're going to make a complete wholesale change at your 2 tackle spots. This could be a work in progress for a month, 6 weeks, and if they lose a couple of those early games, that doesn't bode well considering the second half of the season is where they need to make their headway.
Yeah, I agree with you on the first 2, Paul. Corners, I feel pretty good about corner. I feel good about what we saw from Corey Trice, as kind of a backup on the outside. So I think they got 3 pretty solid guys there. They just got to figure out the slot corner situation. I'll agree with you with quarterback at number 2. I think I'll flop offensive line and receiver just because, listen, I get why there are questions now, and I've been the first person on this show for weeks saying I think there's going to be more of a learning curve than people think with the offensive line, but I think they have more good players or guys who should be good players on that offensive line than the Steelers have good receivers. I think they have one good proven receiver and a whole bunch of guys. I think Troy Fautanu, Broderick Jones, Isaac Seumalo, James Daniels, and Zach Frazier. I think all 5 of them are or can be good players, and I think by the end of the year that will resolve itself. It's just how quickly can you get there, and I think that's where the confidence is or is not. Quickly, before we move on to the other stuff, Paul, thoughts on the Cam Heyward extension? I heard you and Joe talking on your radio show about how, there's not a ton of obligation to him past this season. If things don't work out, if he doesn't come out from injury well, that they can move on. But here's my question. If he's anything other than an all-pro, maybe still a good player, but not a great player, does allocating that kind of money to another defensive player make sense when there are so many question marks on your offense looking toward 2025 in particular?
Well, I think what this does, Adam, most anything really, this is what it does. It gives them the opportunity to keep him, next year if they want to keep him. And if they need to get out from underneath the contract, they can do it very easily without really, a whole lot of heavy lifting. And so they'll have to make that decision. Really, Adam, next year. They'll look at his season, and then they'll have to figure out, okay, did what he do, is it worthy of this kind of money? So I like the deal from that standpoint. I'll be honest with you, when I first heard the numbers, I thought, boy, that's a lot for, an older player like him and this and that. But when you start to break it down, I don't have a problem with it because I don't think there's anything really in it that they can't get out from underneath if they need to. I think that's an important thing. And it's really important from that standpoint to understand that and note that you have to make sure that you can get out of it without it killing your salary cap. So, to me, I understand your question. And next year they're going to have to pay George Pickens probably. And then the year after that, assuming he does what he's supposed to do, they might have to pay Broderick Jones. You figure at some point they're going to have to pay a quarterback. I get all that. But to me, I don't necessarily think this handcuffs them in any way, because if he doesn't perform to the contract, they can always cut him or, whatever you want to say. However, the Troy Polamalu, Ben Roethlisberger, Richard Nixon like retirement, where it's like you're retiring because we're telling you that we want to save your, the face of you getting cut. And I think Cam Heyward really, would like to play a couple more years, and that's great. But I also think that if he doesn't play well this year, he's the kind of guy that probably will say, okay, it's time for me to hang it up anyway.
Yeah, I ponder whether, like, where is not good enough, and I think he could still be a productive player. And you look and maybe he has 6, 7, 8 sacks, and you say, well, he's solid, but he's not the monster on that defensive line that he once was, and that's where I think it's going to get iffy. Is if he has a good season but not a great season, is that still good enough to bring him back, or are they only bringing him back with the idea that he's going to be an All-Pro? Which that doesn't seem to be how this team operates. Is, well, either go out and be an All-Pro or we're going to cut you. And that's where I wonder where their heads really are, and if they're really going to be prepared to cut him unless he's really bad.
But they've done it before, though, where they tell an older player, listen, it's over. They've done that before to guys, better than Cam Heyward. So it wouldn't shock me if they came to that. They've proven they can do that.
Yeah, but those guys too, I think, Paul, especially like Troy and Ben, they were clearly done. And I think the question is, what if Cam Heyward is not clearly done, but also not what he once was?
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair.
So we will see how that unfolds. All right, we're going to talk some college football now. Before we do, just want to thank another sponsor. It's Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Okay, Paul, college football talk here on the Zeise is Right show. Penn State, I think, is the headline of the week. Just because they were playing another regional team in West Virginia. They beat them rather easily, came out with some hiccups. Didn't look great in that first quarter, but pretty much from the second quarter on, they looked like, a top 10 team, a college football playoff contender. My question for you is how much are you buying the team that you saw Saturday compared to the team that dominated West Virginia and Happy Valley a year ago?
Well, I picked them to go 11-1 and get to the Big Ten championship game. So nothing I saw Saturday changes my opinion. I think they are, on defense, they're athletic, they're fast, they're really sound structurally on defense. Their defense is always going to keep them in games. They're good. Their defensive line is loaded. They look to me like a team. The only team that put it this way, they look to me like a team who will have better players than every team they play except for Ohio State. And I think they'll play Ohio State down to the wire like they always do. I just feel like Ohio State has a little bit of an edge and they'll win. But what I saw Saturday didn't change that. I think, when I looked at the matchup, and I know there were a lot of people last week, they were all worked up at me because, even on my show and on this show and other places, I basically said Penn State doesn't lose these kind of games. Number one. Number two, James Franklin doesn't lose when he has better players, he doesn't lose. And number three, I think Penn State has much better talent than West Virginia. All three of those things, to me at least, watching that game, that's what I saw from that game.
Yeah, I think that I'm a little more bullish on what Penn State may or may not be able to do offensively than I was a year ago because of the way things were drawn up. There were so many replays that Joel Klatt was highlighting how Andy Kotelnicki was putting one defender in conflict where if he covers the receiver, then the quarterback can run or pitch it, or if the guy blitzes, then he hits Katron Allen for that touchdown. I think there was maybe one of those clips, per game last season for Mike Yurcich's offense. I think you saw 4 or 5 in the first half alone from this team. And so just from a design standpoint, I think we saw the creativity and the ability to be explosive against Power 5 competition. I think they were a little sloppy. I think they have some kinks to work out, but the schedule is going to benefit them in that way. And you get non-Power 5 teams the next couple of weeks, and then you get Illinois at home under the lights, presumably in a primetime game that people are going to be juiced for. So I think you're avoiding the 9 overtime setting from a couple of years ago where Illinois kind of snuck up on Penn State at home. So I think it looks better in design. I think it's a question of how quickly the execution is going to come along. Paul, Pitt piled up the points against Kent State, 55 points in their win Saturday. Did it tell you anything, or do you need to see it against better competition before you're going to buy what Kade Bell is doing for that group?
Well, I think Kent is bad. I think they're bad, Adam, really bad. So I'm going to preface everything I say by acknowledging the competition wasn't good. That being said, if you watched last year, who was the first game they played? Was it Wofford? One of those teams like that, they played early last year with Yurkovich from Pine Richland and Frank Cianetti calling plays. And you know what? It wasn't very good. It wasn't very fun to watch. It was kind of ugly. So at least I'll say this. Competition what it is. Because I know people jumped on your throats. Oh, it was Kent. Competition what it is. I saw more creativity, a variety of what they did, more, stuff that actually made the defense think than I saw all of last year in one game. Number one. Number two, the quarterback is better than the other 2 guys they had last year. Now, how much better, we'll find that out as we go through, but he's clearly better than the guys they had last year. There's no question about that in my mind. Number 3, I thought receivers played really outstanding and made some combat catches and tough catches and good, big plays on 3rd and whatever. Defensively, they gave up the one on 4th and 7. It was kind of a blown coverage. They had the fluky play, and the punt return thing where it bounced off someone's helmet and hit all like 7 guys' helmets and Kent grabbed it and ran it in. That's 14 points right there out of 28. So I thought the defense played okay. I like what I saw on Saturday. Competition being what it is, I need to see more. But I think the conclusions I came to is the offense is more creative and more like a college offense. The quarterback is probably better than the guys they had last year. And I think that the defense will be a work in progress because a lot of young guys played the other day. And that's probably a good thing because I think that the defense has a chance to be pretty good too.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see how things play out. Yeah. I think, I think it's going to be a better team than winning three games like a year ago. It's just a question of how quickly Pitt's going to get back to the level that it was at of, a really solid program that had the capability to win the ACC, that did win the ACC with Kenny Pickett, that followed it up with another strong, top 25 caliber season. That's what it's going to take for Pitt to keep people's attention. And are they going to be the team this year? I think that remains to be seen. Paul, I got a couple of Pirates points before we wrap up here. Big headline of the week is David Bednar is out as the closer. Do you blame what's happened with him this season on injuries, on him, on the coaching staff, or a combination of the three?
That's a good one, Adam. We had Shelton on yesterday, and he insisted that he's healthy, that he was never injured. But didn't he have a lat injury or something coming out of spring training?
Spring training, yeah.
He had some sort of lat injury, and Derek Shelton got a little defensive and sort of was like, well, we handled him perfectly. We handled him the right way. I have to believe that he has not necessarily been 100% for most of the year. You don't go from what he was to what he became, and I'm not saying that, good pitchers don't lose it from time to time, but man, he can't locate anything. And that leads me to believe that his arm probably is not feeling 100% because that's a big, big thing. So I don't know what's happened with him from the standpoint of his health. but I'd be willing to bet that he's healthy enough to play, but he's not 100% right. And that's right now probably where he's at. And I mean, to me, at this point in the season, I'd shut him down and, try and work on whatever's next, try and get, put him on the DL for a little bit and just try and get some things worked out and get him rested and make sure that everything is good for next year. Cause you need him next year, especially since you're going to lose Chapman.
Last thing I wanted to get your opinion on, Paul, was Jason Mackey wrote a column about basically comparing the Pirates, who are in year 5 of this rebuild and still stink, to the Kansas City Royals, who've lost 200 some games the last couple of years, but are right in the thick of wild card contention this year. You should check that out on postgazette.com because it was lengthy and it was good and great work by Jason. I want to ask this question of you, Paul. Is the fact that the Pirates have on some level not reached a critical mass of people begging for everyone to be fired, is that a testament to how successfully they've lowered expectations compared to what's going on in Kansas City, where they decided we want to flip the switch now, and they did? Whereas that pressure has never seemingly been from anyone inside the organization. And I'm going to even throw out the season ticket, the season ticket base that buys these tickets no matter what. That I always see people showing up to defend the team in the comments on YouTube and on our articles. And you just got to be patient. The help is just over the next hill, and it never plays out that way. I mean, was it a mistake to go through these 5 years and say this is how long it takes, this is how a tank job looks, and that having any expectations until year 5, 6, and 7 is dumb? Because I think the Royals are showing that it should be a shorter timeline than this. Absolutely.
The Royals are one. The Orioles are another team. I mean, there's a few teams that we can point to, even the Astros. But here it is, Adam. If there's no pressure from anyone to try and get over the top, and I would agree with you, I would include season ticket holders, fans. There's a lot of apologists who say, "Oh, the economics and blah blah blah," and wait till next year, and you can't. Okay, at some point though. We've said this all along, Adam. You and I, have agreed on this. At some point, if you're going to take the next step, you're going to have to bring in guys from the outside to get you over the top. And I don't know that they are going to do that again this offseason. And if they don't, what are we going to be looking at again next year? Probably a team that's close to 500. And it is what it is. So yeah, at some point, your quote unquote rebuilding plan, right? I mean, to me, if I'm a general manager and I don't have any what's to stop me from telling the owner, hey, we have a 15-year plan that's going to work. That's a lot of job security for me,
Yeah.
At some point, you have to prove that your plan is working.
I said this on Twitter this week, Paul. I think that we need to begin to make a distinction between why the Pirates are not good, which I think is payroll and a lack of payroll, and why they embarrass and stink. And that is because they employ losers. And they not only employ losers, but they try to gaslight about them. I bring this up, and it's kind of in memory hold. They did an entire month of an episode of Inside Pirates Baseball that they played after every post-game show about what a great guy Austin Hedges was. And here's Austin Hedges, his dad, and here's the value of defense. And it was like they were just trying to gaslight us into believing a 160 hitter is actually good at baseball, because they would rather do that than put in the energy to not be embarrassing. And I listen, and when you bring up that the people defend them on the economics, I'll defend them and say, yes, is that the reason they're not winning 150 games every year? Sure. I believe that. I do not believe that they should look like this in year 5 of a rebuild, and that even with their payroll restrictions, that things should be better if you don't employ. Like, Ben Cherington is on track for his 7th year of either finishing in 4th or 5th place. At what point do you become a loser, Paul?
And that's more than that. It's it's out of 9, 8. I think he's only been a general manager for 8 seasons or 9 seasons, right?
I think 9. So he won that World Series with other guys' players in 13, and then he was gone by the end of 2015.
Right.
In Boston.
So I think he's only been a general manager 9 seasons, and 7 of them have been basically 4th or 5th place. That ain't good.
Yeah. So I think, I don't say loser and like he just loses a lot of games. That's what makes you a loser.
Right.
So, all right, Paul, I'm going to leave it there for the week, though. Thanks for joining me. Everyone, make sure you stay tuned. Paul and I will be live streaming after the Steelers game this week. We're going to be back every Sunday. So if you enjoy this show, we will be back roughly, 10 minutes after the game's over. And then we'll also have plenty of Steelers content from all of our guys at the stadium, Jerry Dulac, Brian Bacco, Ray Fittipaldo, and Christopher Carter obviously has the North Shore Drive. So tons of great content coming your way. Make sure you're subscribed. And I'll be back on Thursday as well with the Penn State podcast. So make sure if you liked our Nittany Lions conversation that you come back for that. Paul, thanks for your time. I'll talk to you again next week.
All right, we'll see you.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.